Welcome to part two of our conversation with Nancy. She is a speech and language pathologist with the Durham District School Board. If you haven't had a chance to listen to part one, I would suggest that you go back and listen to that one first and then come back to this learning and continue the conversation that we had the opportunity to have with her. And we were so thankful that she came in to speak with us because she has such a great amount of knowledge about oral language in our youngest learners. So we are going to just jump right back in to our conversation with Nancy.
So, Amanda and Diane, there's a section, an actual chapter in Oral Language at Your Fingertips. It's chapter 6 called Text Structure. And I love text structure because it's connected to storytelling and narratives. And we know that in education, we, especially early on, we're having children exposed to narratives, descriptive structures, and sequential structures, and they need to know how those things are put together. But before we can unpack it in the reading and the writing area, they have to be able to do it expressively. So a lot of times I like to listen to children's storytelling, and then also their retelling to sort of get a handle on how they sequence ideas. Do they have a beginning, a middle, and an end? Do they include details? What kind of vocabulary are they using when they tell their stories? And for me, one of the key pieces is how do they connect their ideas? We know that connection words are really important in terms of telling stories. So I know that another speech language pathologist is going to talk to you more about storytelling, but I think it's important to spend a little time talking about personal stories and having children have opportunities to tell personal stories so that you get a sense of the organization and the content of their stories. One of the things that I notice in classrooms when children have been out playing and they come in and they're crying and they can't really, I know there's emotion involved, but they can't tell you really what happened because they don't have those narrative skills, those story sequencing skills. They can't identify the problem and certainly not the solution at that point.
Yes.
But storytelling and personal narrative and then retelling stories that they've heard are really important pieces to growing oral language.
And such an important way to communicate with the people around them and grow their social abilities. If they're not able to tell people stories and make that connection with people, then they're not going to have those social skills also embedded in when they're having those conversations.
Right. And you can see how understanding story structure, like what first and in the middle and at the end, and then the sequencing and the ideas and talking about the problem and the solution, you can see how that really is going to impact their written language later. So we want to start and make sure it's strong orally.
So we want to talk about things like what happened at the beginning of the book and what happened in the middle of the book and what happened at the end of the book. You could even take that into your day. So when we arrived this morning, that was the beginning of our day. The middle of our day is lunchtime, the end of our day at school.
And sometimes children need to see pictures to help them organize that. So this happened at the beginning, but using those words. And when you think about those words, they are math words, aren't they? Mathematical words. And so what happened first, that's at the very beginning. So connecting first and beginning will be important. And what are some details? Understanding what are details? What are story details? And then we're going to move into the questions, and I think that later on we're going to talk more specifically about asking WH questions and then asking big questions. So we look forward to going deeper into this area, but it is certainly the way a child tells you a story is really important in how we can help them grow their oral language.
Okay, so Nancy, a lot of the PH words, phonomic awareness, phonological, phenome, could you break those open for us and let's talk about why they're important? I know it's a huge question, but let's plug through it piece at a time.
All right. I'm excited to do that with you. So phonological awareness is a chapter, number 1, in Oral Language at Your Fingertips. It's chapter 3. So I'm going to use that as a reference as we're talking about that.
Great.
So phonological awareness is the only oral language strand that supports children's reading, or actually their decoding.
Okay.
So let's just talk about what it is. Sometimes when I'm talking with educators, I say phonological awareness is hear-say skills, where phonics is see-say. So let's unpack that.
Okay.
So when I see a letter and I know that F, a letter F, says F, that's phonics. I see it and I put a sound to it. So I'm matching a sound to a letter.
See-say.
That
I see it, I say it.
You got it.
Got it.
Phonological awareness, it's a whole series of skills.
Okay.
But in essence, they're all hearsay skills. No print is involved. I hear something, so I say the word dog. I hear D at the beginning. I hear G at the end. So this is a phonological awareness skill. I hear it. So I'm starting to talk about phonological awareness as hearsays. We are all in our speech and language department talking about phonological awareness as hearsay skills and phonics as see-say.
Okay.
Now they need to get partnered up in order for a child to be a really effective decoder. But often children come in without a lot of hearsay skills.
And this goes back to everything else we were talking about previously.
Right on, right on. There's some children who don't have any difficulties in this area, but there are a group of children. And one of the things we talked about, all of the children that really need intentional focus on oral language, sometimes in some schools that makes up 1/3 to 1/2 of the children in your classroom. So that needs some extra and explicit direction in this area. So it's well worth our time to investigate this. So let's go to the hearsay skills, the phonological awareness. We have really shallow skills that deal at the syllable level. So those are breaking syllables, breaking words up into syllables and putting syllables together to make a word. And then we have deep skills at the sound level.
Okay.
So it's really phoneme, which is the same as the word sound. A phoneme is a sound. So it's phoneme awareness that's the predictor of academic success. So a child in kindergarten that has phoneme awareness that words are made up of sounds, that's a predictor of academic success. But we have a wide range of skills under phonological awareness, with phoneme awareness being the most sophisticated skill.
So if we go back to the word dog, does that then mean the child can say d, a, g?
At phoneme awareness,
Yes.
at the skill that we're really aiming for, then they are hearing all of the sounds in that word. We call that phoneme awareness. And
Okay.
they're being able to hear all those sounds.
So the beginning, the middle, and the ending sound.
Right. So what we know from research is that blending and segmenting are the two types of activities that are best used to help children with this skill of phoneme awareness.
Okay.
So when we talk about that big umbrella of phonological awareness, we have all kinds of activities in there. We have children understanding that a sentence is made up of words. We have children understanding that are hearing rhyme and being able to identify rhyme. But what we want to pull out from all those phonological awareness activities, we want to pull out the segmenting and the blending. And that's important because when we blend, it really relates to reading. And when we segment, it relates to our writing.
Super. So can you give us examples of those?
I can. So if I gave you a word, Diane, and I said to you, read this word,
Mhm.
you would start to approach the word by looking at it, because at this stage you are now blending your see-say with your hearsay.
Okay.
But you're going to start looking at that word, and you're going to start saying, what sound is that? What's the next sound? What's the next sound? And then you're going to put it all together. That's your blending, in order to actually read that word. When I say to you, Diane, could you write a word, and I give you a word to write. Let's
Yes.
say you didn't know the word under, and I ask you to write under. You're going to start, uh. You're starting to segment it in order to put it on paper. Now, that segmenting then has to partner with what you know of phonics, and
Yes.
how do you represent that
Yes.
But the part that I wanted to emphasize is that when we blend sounds together or syllables together, we're supporting our reading. When we segment it, sounds and syllables, we're supporting our writing.
Yes.
So let's put a pin in that and go back to the beginning and look at what does this look like developmentally for a child.
Love that.
Phonological awareness skills progress over time. And we're very, very fortunate in Durham District School Board to have a hierarchy of phonological awareness skills included in our Faces on the Data for kindergarten students.
Yes.
So you'll see at the top of this hierarchy that sentence segmentation happens first. Sentence segmentation is challenging for some students because they're having to understand in a spoken sentence how many words. So if I said to you, I like pizza, there are 3 words in that sentence, and children have to be able to identify that they heard 3 words in that sentence to really understand sentence segmentation. So it's a skill that we need to continue to work on over time, especially with our early learners, because it's important for writing, as you can see, and for reading. But I like to move on to the next skill and look at syllable segmentation. That would be when you break syllables down into parts. So if I said, can you clap or tap the parts or syllables in the word elephant, what would you do for me?
Elephant.
Right on. So you broke that down. You segmented all the syllables. So when we ask children, we sometimes start with their name. Can they? And I like to use the word parts and then equate parts to syllables so that they can start hearing that word. And I think it's easy when we ask children to clap the syllables in their name. And that's a skill that we would expect first-year kindergarten students to be able to do. So segment syllables. As words get longer, they're more challenging. So the 2-syllable words like pillow and teacher are easier for students, and sometimes when we have banana and elephant, we'll hear things like banana and just clapping. So it's that idea of helping children understand, without seeing the print, that words are made up of parts.
Can I ask you a question right there, though, Nancy? So do I want to correct a child? If a child says elephant, do I want to then say elephant?
I always think that I want to say, let's do that together. And whether we do hand over hand or we slow the word down, elephant, or I do it with them. And I like to get them to practice that so that they can hear it correctly, because I don't want to give them feedback that they're correct when they just keep clapping without matching the syllable, because that gives me information that they don't really understand that skill.
Awesome.
Amazing.
Yeah.
And I think that's something that can be easily embedded throughout the day too. So you can be clapping out syllables whenever you're doing any kind of activity or reading any book.
I think that absolutely selecting a word, you can do it while you're giving directions to line up. You can do it in all kinds of different contexts. So, and that's another thing the speech language pathologist can help you with if you're running into some problems thinking about how do I do this with students in my classroom. Right following that are syllable blending. So I think this is the step that sometimes gets missed. This is when we say, we're going to read a story about elephant. What do you think our story is going to be about? So we're asking children to hold those parts in their short-term memory and then put it together. So that's the next part. So they can break it apart, but now can they put that syllable together? So that's an important piece. I've seen educators do that with a grab bag, where they put materials in a grab bag and children reach, the educator reach in and says, I found and then they sound out, or they segment the syllables, thank you, of that word, so that then the children can put it together.
I even think about when we're headed upstairs and I go, we are going to the library. Where are we going? And so you can, again, easily embed that throughout the routines of your day also.
Right on, right on. The next skill that children acquire developmentally is now a blending skill. So we talked about the two different skills, segmenting and blending, but now we're going back to blending, and it's called onset and rhyme, and sometimes that's very confusing. Really what that means is the first part of the word and then the rest of the word. So if I said to you the word cat, if I said cat, the first part of the word is k, and the rest of the word is at, k, at. And so we want to move from blending syllables to blending onset and rhyme, because we're getting a little more discrete now, aren't we? We've moved one area of that word to the sound level. So it goes to the individual sound level. So it's a little more challenging for children. So sometimes we can see children who can blend syllables, but they can't blend first sound and the rest of the word. So that's the next skill that we want to address with children. And again, these strategies, if you're unsure how to do them, you can get support for these strategies from your speech-language pathologist. And then as you move on, it's segmenting onset and rhyme. So you're asking the child, can you tell me the first sound you hear in the word cat and the rest of the word? So sometimes, because of the way we teach in classrooms, children can identify initial sounds, but then they can't break that other part off. They can't break the rest of the word off. So there's a really nice hierarchy all the way down to sound segmenting and then sound blending. So always remembering that we go from one to the other. So if a child can tell you that dog is d-a-g, can they also hear when you're saying, what is this word? D-a-g. Can they put it together?
Yes. It's fascinating. So our children who are coming to us at 4 and 5 years old, they'll have some of these skills perhaps already.
At the shallow end.
Yes.
And sometimes some first-year kindergarten students, just because of exposure at home and because it's included in some of the activities that families do with them, they will have well-developed phonological awareness skills or hearsay skills. But a lot of children will not. So you're in first-year kindergarten, you're most concerned at the syllable level, and then as you're moving into the second year of kindergarten, you want to be able to have that onset and rhyme, and then moving into the individual sounds.
So Nancy, what happens then if there's gaps in this learning? We just haven't had experiences, maybe a child was ill, something impeded their ability to sort of have rich experiences with this. How would we see impact in higher grades?
Well, I think it directly, because this hearsay skill has to partner with phonics, we will really see it in their reading. They will not be able to move forward in their reading. So this is a skill that really supports reading development, at least the decoding part of it, not so much the comprehension, because that's all that vocabulary and sentence structure and all of those things we talked about earlier, that impacts comprehension, but the decoding for reading and the encoding for writing is what phonological awareness supports. It's very it's integral, and without it, children may focus on learning all the popcorn words in the classroom, and they may commit them to memory, but when they are having to write or to read a word that doesn't fall into that popcorn category, they don't have those skills. They are not able to do it. So we are seeing that it really makes a difference when children can hear the sounds in words, and when they then have that to partner with a good phonics system where they've learned that that's the letter and that's the sound the letter makes, then they become good decoders. And if you look at any literature, phonological awareness is one of the base and core pillars of decoding for the early grades and for the later grades as well.
Incredible.
Amazing.
So we have a lot of resources in our department about phonological awareness. So this has just been a little quick little summary and introduction, but I really want to encourage educators who are interested in this topic, because it's very important, to connect with their speech language pathologist on next steps, or looking at how can I determine what phonological awareness activities are needed for each student.
And how you can embed them within your classroom
Right.
throughout your routines of the day, and to build those rich skills that are so important of getting students to read.
Right. So what I hear you saying, Amanda, is that it's not really an add-on in the work. It's just
No.
being more intentional in the words that we're saying, and that we can step into this, and when we have a richer understanding, then we're able to fill those pieces and move our kids
I
forward.
think it's been the missing piece. I think as educators in a school system, we really get the phonics piece. We get the popcorn words, and sometimes we even teach kids rules. A lot of times we teach kids rules, like, oh, that quiet E at the end, what does it do to the vowel? But I think that we've missed the phonological awareness hearsay skill. And so children are limping along and they can't sustain their reading, their novel reading, with children who don't have that skill. We see them in grade 3 and grade 4, and they're not moving forward, and they can't continue their learning. And when we go back and look at what's going on, they don't have any phonological awareness skills. They really can't hear the order of sounds in words, and so, like, how can they decode them? How can they write them?
Absolutely incredible, and it just invites so many ideas of pausing reading text and really talking about words and all of those fun sounds.
Yes, and I would say that one of the things I see, and that I see it in text that people are doing it, but I always like to turn the book over and say the word, because when children will default to the visual, because that's what we've been teaching them, right? So when we pause for a word and we're reading a book or we're doing something and you're pulling that word out of the text, you're flipping the book over and say, I heard the word, and then you're saying the word, and then you're doing whatever level of phonological awareness activity that you're working on at that moment, then you're doing it without the print to develop those skills. We want to put it back. We do not get me wrong, we want to put it back with print at one time, because that's how it really works for decoding. So phonological awareness plus phonics equals decoding, right? And it's the phoneme awareness, that later skill that we talked about, that really is supportive of decoding.
So big, right?
It's huge, and we've just scratched the surface here. I think we need to revisit this and do it over and over again to really really understand the fullness of this.
And I think that this is why we wanted to have you here for this podcast today, Nancy, because it's really just an invitation to remember that there's pieces, and maybe I just want to learn a little bit more about this today, and then I'm going to move forward into that, and it really helps to, help me understand what it is that's happening with my youngest learners.
Yes, and I think it's so important to have those aha moments when we're listening to this and realizing there are some missing pieces within my program, and I can embed so much learning throughout the day, and having those aha moments as an educator and thinking about myself and how I want to grow as an educator in the classroom.
Yeah.
It's been a great
Yeah.
conversation.
Yeah, and I think the key points, the key takeaway here is the hearsay skills don't have print involved,
Yep.
and the CSAY do, and then later on they're going to go together
Yeah.
because we need them to support each other in decoding, but that we really have to develop those hearsay skills in children so that they can move forward with their reading successfully.
Amazing.
Thank you so much for all of your knowledge. I was taking notes as you were talking, and I can go back and re-listen to this, and I'm so excited to have all this extra knowledge and to have you walk us through all this amazing information. Thank you so much for joining us today, Nancy.
Thank you for inviting me. It's been a pleasure, and I hope that we will do this again.
Yes,
Thank you.
definitely. Thank you.